Hello everyone and welcome to the Kootneeti's YouTube channel. I am Niranjan Marjani. Today we are going to talk about Iran. As talks are going on about Iran's nuclear deal, uncertainty exists as to its outcome. How important is this deal for Iran and for all the entities involved? And how would it impact the geopolitics of West Asia? To tell us more about that, we have with us Dr. Sujata Ashwarya, who is an associate professor at the Center for West Asian Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and an expert on Iran. Dr. Sujata Ashwarya, welcome to the Kootneeti.
Thank you.
So if I could start by asking about the talks that are going on in Vienna about Iran's nuclear deal. What are the expectations from these talks? Because these have started after several hiccups. So how do you see these talks progressing?
The expectations from the talk are simple and straightforward. What you have here is an expectation of mutual compliance and restoration of the 2015 nuclear deal, with new timelines, of course. So we have heard, according to reports, some progress has been made along these lines. The issue of critical importance at the moment is time. Time is of essence here. Many European and American negotiators believe that the talk is moving on very, very slowly. So what can we do about it? Given that Iran is continuously progressing or making advancement on its nuclear program, and that could thwart a return to the agreement of the 2015 agreement. So at the moment, the window for talks is becoming narrow and narrower every day. So Iran is now enriching at the rate of, say, 20 to 60%. And under JCPOA, it could enrich only up to around 3.67% or 3.7%. Its enriched uranium stockpile has grown, and it is much above what was agreed in the 2015 nuclear deal. So it is also manufacturing and using advanced centrifuges, IR4, IR6, which can considerably quicken the enrichment process. So all these developments put Iran on a path of a nuclear breakout. And nuclear breakout is the point at which a country gains nuclear capability. So the point is that the longer Iran remains out of the deal or outside the deal, the more nuclear expertise it will gain. So if it reaches the nuclear threshold capability, the nuclear deal's purpose would be entirely defeated, would render it obsolete. So time is of essence here. But of course, Iran says that it wants a deal which is stable, secure, and it is taking its own time. And Iran denies ever attempting to develop nuclear weapons. So what we have here is the critical issue of time and the expectations that both parties will join the deal and will take it forward.
Now, negotiations on this agreement have been stalled for a few months since Ibrahim Raisi became president of Iran, and he is considered to be a conservative leader. So how serious is Iran really about this deal?
There are a few things that I want to say here. At the very outset, I must say that I believe that election of Ibrahim Raisi is a positive sign for the nuclear deal. And why do I say it? So in terms of the nuclear deal, Iran's political climate has shifted to conservatism and hardline since the US withdrawal. So what Raisi's victory in the election has done is to effectively align the executive with other institutions of the government, namely the parliament, the judiciary, and of course the IRGC. They're all, have moved towards more conservatism as vis-a-vis the nuclear deal. So that increases the likelihood of the nuclear deal to pass muster, to be accepted without the political wranglings and internecine conflict that we see in Iranian political environment. So I believe that it is a good sign that Raisi will take back the deal, and that would be accepted by the Iranian political establishment. Now, you also have to remember that Raisi was the preferred candidate for Khamenei's preferred candidate for presidency. So in Iran, the supreme leader is the real power center. And the IRGC fully supports Khamenei, and Khamenei supports the talks, the Vienna talks. So I think it is a good sign that Raisi is in power. Now that brings me to my second point. We all know that Iranian economy is crumbling after years and years of sanctions. Economy is in recession. You have oil export has plummeted. There's inflation. Living costs are high, etc., etc. So Iran is currently afflicted with all kinds of economic ailments you can imagine. All possible economic ailments, So the removal of sanctions in the event of a deal is in Iran's interest. And Iran has been, and I believe it is, a rational actor, and it knows what its interests are and what it wants. So Iran is into the talks with getting a deal which it would prefer. Now, look, you can see the seriousness of Iran from the fact that it has climbed down from its earlier position. That was, the United States must suspend sanctions before it enters into negotiations. But now Iran is negotiating without the sanctions being removed or withdrawn or suspended. So it shows Iran is serious about the deal. But as much as it would like the deal, Iran does not want to give in. It believes that it can withstand the pressures, economic pressures, for some more time, even if it comes at the expense of the poorest of poor in Iran. So Raisi's, intention is to seek a better deal than the predecessors, and a better deal than 2015. And that is important to maintain political credibility at home on the domestic front. And so you will see that concessions from Iran won't be that forthcoming as it was before. Now, Iran has made a few things clear that it would do and what it wants and what it would not do. Now, let's begin with what it would not do. It will not discuss the missile program, the ballistic missile program, or the regional role that the regional countries, as well as the America and Europe, accuses Iran of terrorism, of funding proxies that engage in terrorist activities, etc. So Iran is very clear, and I read a report in Tehran Times that Iran is not going to discuss these two issues at all. Now, it wants America to immediately lift all sanctions imposed by Obama administration and Trump administration before it joins the deal. So I'll come to this particular aspect a little later. Third, it says that US must compensate Iran, which is fairly easy. It could do that, or some amount of compensation can be negotiated. Fourth, it will return to the deal only after it has verified that sanctions have been lifted, and it can export oil that it wants to. And fifth, that US should give legal guarantee that it is not going to leave the deal in the foreseeable or in the future. So let's come to the point of removal of sanctions and verification of sanctions. And this is the point at which the talks are, you can say, talks become very difficult. So Iran wants to return to compliance of the JCPOA once the US has returned to full compliance and lifted sanctions on Iran. So the point here is who goes first, whether you lift the sanction or whether Iran complies with the provisions of the 2015 deal, provisions on nuclear enrichment, stockpile, and introduction of advanced centrifuges. So what should be the timing of UN sanction relief? And this particular aspect of negotiation is called sequencing. Now, how do you sequence it? Who goes first? And this is a major block, a major stumbling block in the Vienna talks. Each party expects that the other party will go first. Now, Iranian negotiators have insisted on having the opportunity to confirm that sanctions have been lifted before they, comply with the provisions of the deal. Now, you have to remember that even before President Trump imposed sanctions on Iran or reimposed sanctions on Iran, Tehran had complained of already of the existence of a web of sanctions that was preventing from making investment in Iran, as well as having trade with Iran. So for Iran, the removal of sanctions is the most critical issues, and it wants to verify those sanctions have been removed before it returns to compliance. Now, it is unlikely that the US negotiators would accept a very disquieting situation in which the American sanctions are lifted, and then they are waiting for Iran to determine whether the lifting of sanctions are sufficient for it to return to nuclear compliance. That is, kind of creating a power differential between the parties. Now, if Iran says that, well, this particular sanction has not been lifted, or these group of sanctions prevent me from doing what I want to, then the US negotiators are in a quandary, whether to agree with that or whether to wait for a compliance. So many say that the parties could go, step by step or in a phased manner. With some sanctions being lifted, Iran then says, well, the sanctions are lifted, and that clears the deck for Iran to comply with some provisions, a phased manner. But we really do not know how this will come about. Now, we also have reports of Russia having discussed a possible interim agreement with Iran. And it seems to be a step in the direction of a phased sort of return to the deal. But Iran, again, has said that it's not interested in any interim arrangement. So all in all, sequencing, the aspect of sequencing, or who goes first and who goes second, is what is the most difficult issue at the moment in the Vienna talks.
Now, during Donald Trump's presidency, United States withdrew from this nuclear deal in 2018. Is it still opposed to this deal?
The current administration, I believe, is not opposed to going back to the JCPOA, with, of course, different timelines. JCPOA had certain timelines, 10 years, 15 years, and then a new sort of negotiation that would have taken place. But if you look at the opinion poll in America, I've looked at a few opinion polls, and what you gather from there is that most American voters support the 2015 nuclear deal, at least the architecture of the deal. The timelines are, of course, going to change because that deal is going to be more than, 7 years of the deal. So the timelines are going to change, but most American voters would support a nuclear deal along the lines of the 2015 JCPOA. They believe that if sanctions are required to be removed, to trigger Iran or to put Iran on the path of negotiation or to take the talks forward, then so be it. Those sanctions should be removed. At the same time, a thin majority, a very small majority, are more skeptical of the deal. And they believe that even if there is a nuclear deal, a new nuclear deal, nothing can prevent Iran from going nuclear because its nuclear program is already at a certain stage, at an advanced stage. So it is very difficult at the moment to prevent Iran from becoming a threshold nuclear state or reaching the breakout point. So, however, if the questions are framed as to whether Donald Trump was correct in withdrawing from the Iran deal, then you see a divide along the ideological or along the party lines. So it depends on how you are framing the question to the larger American public. Now, on January 12th, I think, just a week ago, about 100 House Republicans called on the government to, or wrote to the government to immediately withdraw from the talks, because Iran is advancing its nuclear capability while negotiating. So while the negotiations are going on, they say that Iran is going on enriching uranium or introducing new centrifuges. So, it clashes with the very spirit of the negotiation, and they believe that Iran is negotiating in bad faith. So they say that the most effective way to halt Iran's advancement is to enforce the sanctions that are already there, impose more sanctions, and urge the allies to follow suit. So, within the Capitol Hill, you have this great divide between Democrats and Republicans. And there's some divide among the Democrats themselves over the pace of the negotiation and over the fact that Iran continues to indulge in enrichment, continues to increase the stockpile of enriched uranium and introduce advanced centrifuges that will enable it, or that has put Iran firmly on the path of a breakout capability, a threshold capability. And they are, telling President Biden to quicken the pace of the program, or to impose more punitive sanctions, or enforce the sanctions that are already there. So in America, what you have is a divided opinion, let's say. Now, President Biden, right in the very beginning of his tenure, had promised a longer and stronger deal, a stronger pact that will, take care of many other aspects of Iranian nuclear program, such as how these go with the ballistic missile development, or Iran's own behavior, in quotes, in the region. So, but as negotiations drag on, and as Biden continues to lose, domestic support, and his economic woes are increasing, we might see more concessions coming from the White House, so to say.
Do the European Union and the United States have opposing views on this deal? Like EU is more keen and US may not be so?
No, I don't think so. I believe both the EU and the US are on the same page as far as the JCPOA, the nuclear talks, are concerned. Both are equally very about Iran's nuclear program, Iran's ballistic missile program, Iran's regional role, etc. So I believe they are on the same page. Now, following but there's one difference, that following the US withdrawal from the deal in May 2018, and the sanctions that were imposed after that, the EU remained determined to continue to support the deal and continue to support or pursue legitimate trade relations with Iran. So it devised certain mechanisms to do that. That, I believe, is the only difference. The fact that US withdrew from the deal and EU didn't, and continue to support the deal. Otherwise, as far as the provisions of the deal are concerned, or other aspects, missile development, etc. So EU and US, I believe, are on the same plane, same page.
Okay. If we talk about West Asian politics, then on one hand, Israel is constantly talking about conflict with Iran, and while on the other hand, United Arab Emirates is emphasizing on improving its relations with Iran. So could this initiative have an impact on Israel's attitude?
In international politics, the countries make their own decisions according to their own interest. But let me say something. UAE's relation with Iran and Israel's relation with Iran, or rather the absence of relations with Iran, are on two different planes. UAE has a maritime disputes with Iran related to islands in the Persian Gulf. It has differences with Iran relating to war in Yemen. But we have to remember that UAE has close economic ties with Iran. It is the hub of re-export and re-import for Iran. So naturally, these countries are seeking better relationship, better ties in the future. Moreover, UAE wants to get out of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. So, and focus inward towards more economic and social reform. So UAE has an entirely different set of imperatives vis-a-vis Iran. Now we know that Israel has no relations with Iran. And since you're talking about change in Israeli attitude towards Iran, let me tell you this. Israeli leadership across the political spectrum, it doesn't matter whether they are left or right or center, whatever, across the political spectrum, are wary of Iran's nuclear ambitions. At least what is that they believe it is. It is an ambition to become a nuclear weapon state. Now they believe that no deal whatsoever can stop Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state, or at least acquiring a nuclear threshold, a breakout capacity. And the only way Israel believes that Iran can be stopped is by degrading Iran's nuclear program through military strike. Nothing else can prevent Iran on its path towards nuclear weapons. The question is, why does Israel believe that no deal can stop Iran from achieving the nuclear threshold? And why does Israel so desperately want to stop Iran's nuclear capability? Now that has got to do with the idea of qualitative military superiority, or QMS or QME, as they call it, qualitative military edge in the region. Now, Israel has a superior arsenal. Israel is a nuclear weapon state, although not declared, but it wants to maintain that. And so if Iran has a nuclear weapon, Israel's QME in the region would be degraded, would be permanently eroded. And no amount of international guarantee or assurance can secure Israel in perpetuity. That's what the Israeli political elites believe, that they have to take care of their own security. No amount of assurance works. International assurance. They do not believe in that. So to avoid such a scenario, Israel has taken matters in its own hands in recent years, especially after 2015, of sabotaging Iran's nuclear facilities, of assassinating scientists, etc. And I'm not saying this, I'm not speculating. These are all out there in open, and this information is available to all. So the JCPOA, Israel believes, does not adequately address, or no nuclear deal can adequately address its security concerns. It merely, they would merely delay Iran's ability to acquire nuclear weapons, but cannot change Iranian intentions. So Israel's only option for ensuring its security is to target Iran's nuclear program. So no, I don't think UAE's overtures to Iran will change Israel's attitude, though UAE and Israel are now, have a diplomatic relationship, and they are taking the relationship forward in many areas. But that is at bilateral level, and maybe that is having an impact on Persian Gulf Arab countries, say Oman or Bahrain, but it's not going to have an impact on UAE's relation with Iran. So UAE has its own set of imperatives or reasons why it wants better relations with Iran. And they are not necessarily what Israel wants in the region, although the ultimate goal is to have a secure community in the region, of which Israel is a part. And UAE would like Israel and Iran both to be a part of the security community that it wants to build. But for the moment, and as I see in the foreseeable future, unless the nuclear issue is resolved to the satisfaction of Israel, I do not see Israel being influenced by any country on Iran. So each country, I would say, has its own set of imperatives, and they work for their own interest, and that is the rational thing to do in international politics. Yeah.
Now we have seen in the past few years, this nuclear deal has had an impact on India's relations with Iran as well, because after US imposed sanctions on Iran, India stopped purchasing oil, and now since India's relations with the US are strengthening, can India normalize its relations with Iran? Because at least at the moment, Iran remains the primary gateway for India to Afghanistan and Central Asia.
Now, India, I believe, whether it be, in the 50s, 60s, 1990s, or now, India does not see a bilateral its bilateral relations as a zero-sum game. Okay, so all bilateral relations can exist at one point of time. And they can have, there can be as many bilateral and multilateral relations as possible. So that is into the DNA of our foreign policy. Okay, we don't allow one bilateral relation to impinge on another. So, but can each of them thrive at the same time? Can each of them have the same dynamism at the same time? That is the question. So there is no doubt that India's relations with Iran has been greatly impacted because of Iranian nuclear issue with the US and with the European community. Now, that is an Iranian nuclear issue is just not with the West. It also has an impact on India as well as other nuclear weapons countries. It has an impact on the entire proliferation regime. Now, but it's also true that we did have a breather for some time after the nuclear deal in 2015. Post that nuclear deal, it appeared that India would be able to restore and even re-energize ties with Iran. If you recall, PM Modi visited Iran in 2016, and there a number of agreements were signed at that point of time relating to Chabahar, relating to trade, etc. We also began to import more oil from Iran, or rather it went back to the pre-sanction days. So it was a win-win situation in the context of the deal for both India and Iran. It was a happy situation. So once the US withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed third-party sanctions, you understand that third-party, so if Indian companies engage with Iran, then they are subject to US sanctions, meaning that their market in the US will be restricted. So no country, US is the largest economy, so no company would like to, jeopardize being herded out of the US market. So once the third-party sanctions were announced, India had no choice but to, Indian companies, etc., had no choice but to bring Iranian oil import down to zero. So India received Iranian oil, and it is important to here emphasize that it did have an impact on our energy, or how we imported energy and where we imported energy from, and the price that we were paying for it. So India received Iranian oil at a comparatively lower price. There were special prices for Asia and India from Iran, and there were lines of credit. So Iran also offered credit lines. So taking money later, being paid later after a point of time, or money being deposited in an Indian account or something. And, you know, there were many other arrangements. So that all of those arrangements came to an end. And I won't say that didn't have an impact, even though we started importing more oil from the US. It did have an impact on, you know, on our energy procurement. So both countries, both India and Iran, were at a loss here. Further, you know, due to sanctions, India has not been able to make the kind of investment it would want to in the Chabahar port terminal and build new terminals and other infra projects, such as the Chabahar-Zahedan railway line that would connect Indian, you know, that would take Indian goods from Chabahar port to Zahedan, and from Zahedan, the border, to Afghanistan. So, which is a significant loss, because our relations with, or our a line of communication, or our trade lines with Central Asia and Afghanistan is being disrupted, or rather it's been slowed down. And due to tensions with Pakistan, it is impossible for India to have any overland route to Central Asia or to Afghanistan. So Iranian port of Chabahar and Iran serves as our gateway to Central Asia and our gateway to Afghanistan. And now that China plans to invest in infra projects in Iran, India is worried as to what would happen to Chabahar, and what would happen to all the investment that it has made in Chabahar, and all the future projects that are lined up, but not, and it has not been able to execute because of the sanctions. Now, also but India is moving forward with its relations with Iran as far as security of the lanes of communication is concerned, trade relations, etc. So, given the recent, you know, events in Afghanistan, Iran has emerged as an important ally for India. So while Iran did not invite India to a meeting on Afghanistan in October, India invited Iran, along with Russia, China, and Pakistan, and other Central Asian countries, to the National Security Advisors Dialogue on Afghanistan. So India has increased its cooperation, and is reaffirming that Iran remains an important country for its trade, and as a partner in security. So this particular initiative on India's part goes on to show that it is reviewing and reassessing the ties with Iran that had been, that had frayed under the impact of sanctions. All right. So having said that, Iran going nuclear, or becoming a threshold country, acquiring a breakthrough capability, is not an ideal situation to have in a close proximate neighbor for India. It would imply a weakening of the proliferation regime, which India cannot support. India has always, despite being out of the NPT, has always supported the spirit of non-proliferation. India has never sold nuclear know-how, etc., unlike our neighbor, to any third country. India has always pursued its nuclear program in a very responsible way. And so a breakdown of proliferation regime is not something that we can support. So while India does support Iran's or any other country's right, for that matter, to develop a civilian nuclear program for electricity, for other medical purposes, we cannot support Iranian nuclear program, or the civilian aspect of the program, if the IAEA raises questions about certain activities of Iran. And India's point is that Iran should be able to answer all the IAEA's question to the satisfaction of the international community. So that is a fine difference that India always takes as far as Iran's nuclear program is concerned.
Now you mentioned China, and that's what my next question is going to be about China-Iran relations. Now, can it be said that after China's investment of $400 billion, Iran has emerged as a focal point of competition between the US and China in the Indo-Pacific region?
I see a compelling emerging ties between China and Iran and a long-term partnership with geopolitical implication. I'll tell you how. The signing of an agreement that talks of China investing about 400 billion in Iran's energy, communication, telecommunication, industry, road, infra, healthcare, etc., over the next 25 years, is this agreement, of course, is part of the China's BRI Belt and Road Initiative. So on the surface, it appears to be a good deal for Iran. Such an exchange would help the country to become a future Central Asian hub and rail hub, rail and infra hub, and why it would also project China's military power in the Persian Gulf. So it appears to be a give and take relationship, a reciprocal relationship. We do not know whether it's going to stand the test of time at the moment, but let me say something else about this investment, which is not obvious in the first go. China is not only investing in Iran, China is also investing or is looking for a more investment and trade in the entire Central Asia, in that entire landmass of Central Asia. So if you recall, the BRI began with Central Asia. All right. So China is looking to link up the grand plans of economic diversification of the entire Central Asian and the Middle East, West Asian region. So it is looking for trade and investment in the Arab Gulf countries. It has already made some significant investment in Kuwait. It is looking for investment in Saudi Arabia. China has been investing in Israel as well. So Chinese investment in Israeli technology between 2011 and 2017 reached more than 15 billion already. It must be more. China has invested in Kuwait, in Kuwait's refinery, etc. So coming back to Iran, China is committing a huge amount of money over a long period of time. And it says something of a different nature. It's a part, I believe, of a strategy to control the entire Eurasian heartland. And if you recall, many geostrategists have talked about the control of whoever controls the European heartland controls the world. Right. We know that BRI started with the aim of uniting Eurasia economically through newly built infrastructure. And Iran, with this promise of 400 billions of investment, I think is the last bastion in that uniting the Eurasian heartland. So exchanges with Iran is just not a bilateral exchange, but part of a multilateral exchange of creating a network of infrastructure projects, of economic and trade relationship with the entire Eurasian heartland, as well as moving down to, if you're geographically moving down to the Middle East, Central Asian region, West Asian region, going up to the Red Sea. So China is, what China is doing is to contest American primacy in all these areas and virtually everywhere around the globe. And it begins, and it began with a contestation in the Eurasian heartland. And now it is down to the Persian Gulf. Now there's another aspect to the entire Chinese investment saga or Chinese-Iranian saga. Now, we do not know what kind of forces act upon a relationship or investment over a long a long period of time. And 25 years is a long period of time. There are many unknown unknowns. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. So, but at least we know at least two known unknowns. First, the agreement allows China's military presence on Iranian soil to protect its workers and investment, as it has in Iran. It has in Pakistan. So now we do not know how it's going to play out with the Iranian establishment. I'm not sure whether the Iranians have thought through it, of having Chinese military on ground, on soil in Iran. We know that many countries, second, we know that many countries have been left with a debilitating debt problem because of China's lending strategy as part of China's BRI initiative infrastructure program. So here I'm sure that Iranians have thought about it, and we need to watch how it unfolds. We recently heard of Sri Lanka's debt crisis, and India, of course, lent some millions of dollars to bail out Sri Lanka. So these two are known unknowns. We don't know how they are going to pan out in the future, in the next 10 years or 15 years when the investments begin. So, but there are unknown unknowns. We do not know, say, for instance, the pandemic that we are experiencing now. Was an unknown for the world. So there are so many unknowns that we do not know what will happen in the next 25 years. And I hope good things happen. So what we need to do is to watch and keep tab on things. China, of course, will. It seems that China is being benefited by the BRI initiatives. From Iran, it will benefit in terms of regular and discounted supply of oil, which it requires for its growth, even though it's working towards having more and more non-carbon or renewable sources of energy into its entire energy is entire energy usage. So what at the moment we need to wait for investments to begin and see how things pan out.
Well, Dr. Sujata Ashwarya, thank you for your time and for speaking to the Kootneeti. It's a pleasure for us.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to talk to you and to listen you elaborate upon various aspects of the JCPOA as well as the geopolitics of West Asia. We hope you found this interview informative and insightful. You can tell us what you think in the comment section below, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on various social media websites, the details of which are on your screen. Thanks for watching.